Okay, and we would now like you to introduce yourselves and your teacher.
Hi, my name is Riley Didcott.
Hi, my name is Trinity Daly, and we attend Bumpus Middle School, and we will be doing Unit 4, Question 1.
My name is Caden Ray, and I will be doing time off at Bumpus Middle School, and we will be doing Unit 4, Question 1.
Okay, Caden, if you do you have like a spacer in your mask? Because it's kind of a little difficult to hear you. So before we begin your testimony, I just want to make sure that we'll be able to hear you, so we won't have that concern while you're giving your presentation. All right. Okay, and as you mentioned, this is Unit 4, Question 1. An American historian claims that the ratification debates were one of the greatest and most probing public debates in American history. Do you agree or disagree? Why? What evidence can you offer to support your response? Evaluate the major arguments the Federalists advanced in support of ratification of the Constitution. Evaluate the major arguments the Anti-Federalists put forth in opposition to ratification of the Constitution. Why did a Bill of Rights become a focal point for both the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists? You may begin.
American historian Holney Mayer claims that the ratification debates were one of the greatest and most probing public debates in American history. The whole ordeal of the debate circled around the most important event in history, creating the ratification of the Constitution. Many people had different opinions about this being a new aspect in what they thought was stable government. The disagreement split the American people in two separate groups known as the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. The Constitution still has effects on us today because people in society still have mixed opinions on it. Citizens' rights were still being taken away despite the fact that the Constitution was supposed to solve the majority of society's issues and disagreements, although there were no current major events that involved the Constitution's ratification. Many people still come forth with complaints that authority figures such as police officers, governors, and mayors have violated their constitutional rights. In addition to all that being said, the ratification of the Constitution still sticks with the U.S. citizen, and we now have legal protection, making the ratification of the Constitution a very important factor in American history. The debate sparked many people's attention because every American citizen knew that this change could lead society down an entirely new path.
The major arguments the Federalists advanced in support of the Constitution's ratification was that they wanted a very enduring source of a government that was very tenacious and capable in leading the government and leading the people of America. The Federalists were fond of the fact that the Constitution was going to stabilize the U.S. government. According to the article Ratification of the Constitution, it states that the Federalists wanted a strong government and a strong executive branch. The Federalists did not want a Bill of Rights. They thought the new Constitution was sufficient. This piece of evidence is essentially saying that the Federalist expectations were very high when it came to the Constitution being made. The Federalists overall believed that the Constitution is what the government needed in order to make the government better. They also believed that the Constitution was going to balance out the power in the government, making sure not one person had control, nor one group of the people. The major arguments the Anti-Federalists put forth in opposition to the ratification of the Constitution was that they were afraid of the government having too much power, thus taking away certain rights and freedoms regarding the American people. The Anti-Federalists were not for the ratification of the Constitution because they also feared that the government would become too strong and take control over the U.S. citizens, leaving them without any freedom. According to the article Anti-Federalists, written by Mitzi Ramos, it states that the Anti-Federalists opposed the ratification of the 1787 U.S. Constitution because they feared that the new national government would threaten individual liberties. Evidently speaking, the ratification debate settled the disagreements between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The Anti-Federalists wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted, which was the Constitution gone. This leads us to what resolved the issue known as the Bill of Rights.
The Bill of Rights became a focal point for both the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists because both of them, yet again, had different opinions on what the Bill of Rights would do for the government and how it would affect the lives of American people. According to the article Bill of Rights in 1791, it states that the Federalists argue that the Constitution did not need a Bill of Rights because the people and the states kept any powers not given to the federal government. Anti-Federalists held the Bill held that the Bill of Rights was necessary to safeguard individual liberty. This piece of evidence is saying that the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists yet again could not come to an agreement on another factor being added to the government. The Bill of Rights being added to the Constitution did change the lives of the American people. The Bill of Rights, along with the Constitution, is still up and running to this day and has done more good than harm in American society. In conclusion, the Federalists and Anti-Federalists, Bill of Rights, and Constitution have played a major role in history and made America, along with society, what it is today. Even though the disagreements between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists wasn't evenly settled.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I have a question. In your opening statement, you mentioned that there are some concerns about citizens' rights being taken away. And then in your last statement, you mentioned that the Bill of Rights and the Constitution has done more good. Could you elaborate on some examples of those thoughts and maybe how what's your position on those two thoughts? Do you agree or disagree with those positions? Because it seems that you may have differing opinions on that.
Well, with today's time with social injustice and things like that, many people still feel like their constitutional rights are still being sacred. And although if you look back over the years, the Constitution has gave us many great opportunities in the US, but everything is not perfect. So many people still have come forth saying that, well, this is my rights and the Constitution is still taking them away. So I agree with that. The Constitution has done more good than harm, but at the same time, everything can be better and everything, including the Constitution, could have be more stronger in addition.
Okay. You mentioned that the Anti-Federalists were afraid of government having too much power. In another part of your opening statement, you talked about people being afraid of police, governors, and mayors. Is that the part of government that the Anti-Federalists were afraid of? What are we talking about when we're talking about government being too powerful?
Somebody has to mute themselves when she's.
The Anti-Federalists were afraid of too much power in authority figures because when they lived in the monarchy, the government and authorities were constantly taking over their powers. They wanted the judicial branch to separate these, give like some power, say, to the people because they never had that. And when it comes to police work, police are supposed to like keep the law in force and not overstep their boundaries.
And also to add on to that, back in the time when the Constitution was being made, they didn't really have like really what we call now officers and governors and mayors. So injustice back then was very like less social and more of like kind of like how society was back then. So in today's, your constitutional rights are most being broken because of probably like race or something like that, or like religion or your society standards because of the First Amendment of the Constitution. And when there was no Constitution, that couldn't have been broken, which was why it was created along with the Bill of Rights.
So I'd like to ask you about the Bill of Rights. What individual liberties are guaranteed in the Bill of Rights? And also, you kind of mentioned in your response to some of the questions that kind of the protections of individual rights could be better. What, if anything, did the Bill of Rights leave out that might protect individual rights more?
Like certain things, like basically more justice in the people, because a lot of people like in like our society today still does not get the justice it needs because of the constitutional rights. So maybe like the Bill of Rights could, even though they have things like freedom of this, freedom of that. It still needs to be like go about what you wrote more likely. So basically more justice with the American people to this day and getting people like what they really like kind of deserve when it comes to their constitutional rights.
All right. I'd like to change up the conversation a little bit. In your testimony, you mentioned the balance of power, and that was one of the concerns of the Federalists. Could you explain what you mean by the balance of power?
With balance of power, today we have checks and balances to ensure like the legislative, executive, and judicial can check over each other's powers to make sure they're not abusing them or overstepping boundaries. And such as the executive branch has the president, and the president can veto laws, but then the executive can, or the legislative can, if 2/3 of the House can override the president's veto.
Okay, you've also in response talked about the judicial branch. Could you tie that into what we just talked about with this balancing of power? What is the judicial branch part of the problem or part of the solution for dealing with the balance of power issue that you've just mentioned?
They are part of this. The reason, like, their part is like, I guess, judicial review. They can overthrow the laws from that are bad or unconstitutional to the American government.
I would like to add on saying that judicial review, even if the law isn't necessarily like bad, but maybe not just good for the society at that time. So judicial review just basically like takes the law and kind of looks at it to make sure it's not, because it might not be a bad law, but it just might not be okay for society at that certain time. So that's what judicial review helps override.
So you said early on in your statement that there's the public still has mixed opinions on the Constitution today. Can you talk a little bit about what the public today thinks about the Constitution?
Well, I believe that they think that the Constitution has really stabilized our government and that how much we evolved over the years from in 1787 to like now 2021, the government has officially advanced, but you know, like I said before, everything can't be perfect. So many people still believe that we were better off without the Constitution because we had a government.
Okay, right.
All right. Thank you for providing us with your insight on this question. I enjoyed listening to you speak today. I feel that you are very passionate about the Bill of Rights and social justice. It seems that that is something that is really on the forefront of your minds, as it should be, because that is something that we are currently dealing with in our society, and it definitely impacts all of us. I like your conversation about how citizens are really concerned about where the government stands in their lives, about whether or not they have too much power or maybe they have just enough power. And you mentioned also that that the Constitution, even though it's not perfect, it's okay. And I like that you know that it could be improved in some ways, but it's helping us function with what we have. We're doing the best we can right now, and even we could improve it in some way, shape, or form. And thank you for giving us your testimony today, and I would like to see more of you soon.
Yeah, thank you for the work that you've done getting to this point. I have a personal interest in this. I went to school when I was a little bit younger than you are now up in Northeast Alabama. So I'm always very interested in Alabama students. And I can tell you, you are more advanced than I was at your age. And you're wrestling with important issues here and issues that need to be wrestled with throughout the country and particularly in Alabama. I still have some family in parts of the state there too. So yeah, continue to wrestle with these. You've put in a lot of good work. It shows, and I appreciate what you've done and appreciate your efforts in getting to this point. Thank you.
As I agree with my colleagues, I really appreciated this discussion this morning. I thought you had a really strong opening statement in terms of the way that you were able to state the positions of the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist. You let us know who they were, you let us know where they stood, and you were very, very clear on that. I also thought that I appreciated the emphasis on social justice, both the mention in your prepared statement and how it came through in the remarks that you made. And I agree with Dr. Whitaker that this is a very important current issue, and it's something that maybe in the way that we're experiencing social injustice today, the founders might not have seen it that way, but we still have to deal with it. And the Constitution is something, a document that we can rely on if it's interpreted appropriately to protect the rights of individuals. I also like the way that you mentioned about the Constitution as kind of a document that adjusts over time, that it creates a stability. While it's not perfect, it creates a stability in our government, and that it needs to be interpreted and reinterpreted with changing circumstances in our society. So I thought you did a really great job, and thank you for the discussion.